In this video, I'm going to explain how to choose monsters for your encounters so that they'll be fun and dynamic for your players. Hey, Lurker here. Just in case you're new to my channel, I create weekly D&D videos with information and resources to help dungeon masters run awesome games. Let me tell you why I suck as a dungeon master. Now let's say that I'm reading the monster manual or Mordenkainen's Tomb of Foes, and I find a monster that's even somewhat remotely interesting to use in one of my games. Well then I get all excited. I'm like Jojo, the idiot circus boy with a pretty new pet. The pet is my new monster. Oh, I love you, my little pet. So I stroke it, and I pet it, and I massage it. Yeah, I love it. I love my naughty pet. You're naughty. And then I take my naughty pet, and I go, ah! I killed it! And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what happens when you just grab monsters randomly from a book and toss them into your game. So for the sake of yourself, for the sake of your players, don't be like Jojo the Idiot Circus Boy. Instead, consider carefully choosing monsters to make your encounters more fun and interesting for your players. So what I'm going to do now is go over several steps for doing just that. Alright, step number 1 is to build your encounters using more than just one type of monster. You see, if you have an encounter built solely out of orcs or just out of hobgoblins, that's fairly boring and one-dimensional. Instead, take those orcs and put some wargs with them. Or take those same hobgoblins and put a hobgoblin wizard with them. That's going to make things much more interesting and dynamic. Having more than one monster type makes your players think more about tactics and possibly strategy. For instance, if you have those hobgoblins and a wizard in the back lines nuking your players' characters, well then they got to think about things like, well, how do we get to that wizard? How do we get past the hobgoblins that are in the front line blocking? Or imagine a front line of soldiers with archers in the back, like shooting arrows at your players' characters, and then assassins darting out of the shadows behind trees to stab at them. Encounters are just simply more dynamic and tactically engaging when there are multiple enemy types on the field. Alright, number 2 is to choose complementary enemy types when you're building your encounters. Most monsters do have other types of monsters that they're well known for working with that make sense for an adventure to have them together. You can definitely check out Volo's Guide to Monsters for that sort of thing. Mordenkainen's Tomb of Foes probably has it, and I know the Monster Manual mentions it from time to time. And of course, as the Dungeon Master, you can always just say that two monsters work together because you're the Dungeon Master, and your world is your world, and you can do what you want. In order to help choose complementary enemy types, it really does help to categorize them. And I like to use the categories from 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Now, I know, 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons doesn't exactly have the best reputation, and I've never actually played it, but I do like to steal little bits and pieces from it that I find useful. Let me know, by the way, if you also do the same thing, steal bits and pieces from 4th edition that are useful for games, things like minions and stuff like that. And if you think that 4th edition should burn in the 9 hells, then leave me a comment down below to that effect. Alright, let's talk about the 6 different types of 4th edition monster categories. The first one that you have are brutes. Now, brutes you can think of as having really high damage output, fairly low armor class, and relatively high hit points. These are the monsters that are going to get in the PC's face and just beat them to death with tons of damage output. Ogres and giants are really good examples of brutes. The next category is soldiers. They have a high defense with average damage and average hit points. And what a soldier does is it kind of like holds the front line against the player characters so that other enemy types, maybe in the back lines, can kind of do their thing. Maybe you got a wizard nuking people or something like that. Examples of soldiers are hobgoblins and Githyanki. Alright, your next category is artillery. Now, artillery do crap loads of damage from a range, but have really low defenses, low armor class, low hit points, that sort of thing. Think of a wizard perhaps throwing fireballs from the back, or even archers that are perhaps shooting from the back, doing decent amounts of damage, say with flaming arrows, but once you get up close to them, they're going to go down pretty darn quick. Alright, the next category is Skirmishers. They have relatively average hit points and defense and stuff like that, maybe a little bit low. However, they do have the ability to get fairly high damage output, and their whole shtick is sort of running circles around the enemies. They might have the ability to take a bonus action to disengage or dash, and then they just do really good damage output. Spies are a good example of skirmishers. Alright, the next category type is lurkers. Now a lurker has fairly low armor class hit points and that sort of thing, but their whole thing is the ability to hide or stealth. They kind of lurk around unknown, and then they jump out and BAM! They get a PC, do tons of damage to him, maybe leave him dying dead on the ground, maybe have crap loads of poison damage or something like that. The assassin is a good example of a lurker. Alright, the next category is controllers. Controllers basically control the battlefield. They prevent the player's characters from moving. They might lock them down, maybe give them bad saving throws, things like that. Mind Flayers and Wizards or Clerics are fairly good examples of controller types. A Mind Flayer obviously has this psionic blast that can totally incapacitate you. Wizards and Clerics can do things like hold person or hypnotic pattern or wall of force that will lock you down. Now there is also another category called leader, but I don't feel that that crosses over to 5th edition super well, so we're just going to skip that one. And somebody right now is like, how can you skip the leader, Luke? Well, dude, it's my video. I'm going to skip the leader if I want to. So basically what you want to do with all of these categories is when you're choosing creatures, monsters for your encounters, you want to choose creatures from different categories. For instance, you might have a soldier type combined with an artillery. And the whole idea of the soldier is that they lock down your player's characters, while the artillery types kind of blast them from afar. Or you might pair up brutes with controllers. The controllers might do something like hypnotic pattern on the player characters, not allowing them to do anything, or maybe hold person, even worse. And then the brutes, doing tons of damage, just go up to them and start whacking them. And then you have a bunch of dead player characters on your hand, and you've won D&D, right? Now, I don't think that this whole idea of categories always works super well in 5th edition. Obviously, 4th edition was kind of designed around the idea of those categories, and 5th edition is a little bit more noodly. You kind of got to figure it out and kind of figure which monster is in which category. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's not. And the reason we're mixing this up is that it makes the encounter much more interesting when you have, say, for instance, the hobgoblins in the front that are locking the player characters down, and then the wizard in the back that is throwing fireballs at them, and then the players have to think about, oh crap, if we don't get to that wizard, we're toast. He's just going to keep destroying us. And so it makes your players think about tactics. It makes them think about things rather than just, there is nothing more boring in the game, in my opinion, than just a surround and pound. Your players' characters simply surround the enemies and just beat them down. It's simply a war of attrition. Who can beat down the person's hit points the fastest? That, in my opinion, is the culmination of boring. Tactics, strategy at a larger scale, those are the things that make encounters and combats interesting. Alright, now what I'm going to do is give you a bunch of examples, because in my opinion, a bunch of theory without examples is pretty lame. However, before we jump into examples, I just want to give a quick shout out to one of my Young Dragon patrons, your pal Jinx. So as part of one of his patron benefits, he gets a shout out in one of my YouTube videos. So, yeah, dude, this is your shout out. And thanks as well for signing your life over in warm blood. I mean, for joining me on this video creation journey. All joking aside, seriously, thank you, dude. I do appreciate it. Alright, yeah. Examples. So I recall this one time I was designing this adventure around Yankee and Mind Flayers, and I placed a Mind Flayer all by himself in a room. And after one mind blast, my players pretty much surrounded him and beat him into oblivion. It was rather boring and pointless in my opinion. So the next time around, I gave that Mind Flayer, well, it was a new one obviously because the other one was dead. I gave the Mind Flayers some Minotaur slaves that could go in front, engage the player character, sort of lock them down, get them busy, and then have the Mind Flayers from the back, blasting them with their psionic blast thingies and throwing spells at them. That sort of thing turned out to be much more interesting than simply one Mind Flayer who gets in the first round or two. Alright, now here's an idea for some hobgoblins. Now we already talked about the hobgoblin wizard and all that kind of bullcrap, so we're going to give something different here. Give your hobgoblins some glaives so that they attack at range. But don't stop there. Give those hobgoblins the Sentinel ability so that when the player characters enter their range, the hobgoblins can immediately attack them, and also it stops all of their movement. So your player characters can no longer get any closer to them, and the hobgoblins keep on, boop, attack them, back up. Player characters come into their range, boop, attack them, and the hobgoblins back up. And you just keep doing this, the entire line of hobgoblins slowly retreating as your player characters, like morons, keep walking forward and getting attacked. They obviously got to figure out a way to get around that strategy. But at the same time, there are wargs that are darting in and out, attacking your players and tripping them, dropping them to the ground. So there you are giving your players lots of different things to think about, and they have to adapt tactics to overcome that challenge. Okay, now wizards are a tricky business because if you put a wizard in a room or wherever by himself, all alone, your players are going to obliterate him. They're going to surround and pound him. He's going to go down so fast. You're like, well, this wizard's supposed to be a CR12, and they just totally destroyed him. You got to give wizards minions. Imagine giving your wizard some clay golems. And the clay golems obviously attack the players first, keeping the players off from your wizard. And then let's not have your wizard on the ground. Let's have your wizard be flying. And let's also give him greater invisibility on himself as well. So he has to obviously concentrate on greater invisibility, so let's give your wizard wings. Let's say he's a tiefling with wings, or maybe a half-dragon or something cool like that. And then your wizard is flying above the characters, invisible, nuking them with spells that the clay golems are immune to. And so now you have an incredibly dynamic, interesting, and fun, well, I mean, at least it's interesting and fun for the Dungeon Master, but your players are stuck with this sort of puzzle of how to figure this out, what to do to not get totally obliterated. I think that sounds pretty cool. Another quick example, a single Rakshasa is just a big friendly kitty just waiting to be like domesticated and declawed. So instead, give that Rakshasa some cultist minions, some frontliners, some caster types, and then throw them all together and you're going to have a much more interesting encounter. And if you're catching the general thread of all of these examples that I'm giving you, the main idea here, by introducing these different monster types and giving them even special abilities and stuff like that, is so that your players would start to think tactically about the encounter and think of ways to overcome the challenge that go beyond just simply engaging and rolling dice and doing damage. Give them a challenge that they got to use their brains to think about, use their cleverness, use their imagination to overcome. And once you start doing that and you get the hang of doing that, then all of your encounters are going to be so much more interesting and fun than the standard old throw a few monsters in a room, you go up and you beat on them, you roll some dice and they die, rinse, repeat, go on to the next one, blah, 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 blah. All right, now if you're thinking that all of those examples that I gave you are fairly complicated and that you can't possibly go that in depth on every single encounter, well, you're probably right. I wouldn't spend tons of that much effort on every single encounter. Maybe just a few encounters in an adventure, make them super special and super awesome. But even if you don't go to do that, just mixing your monster types is going to make, just that alone is going to make your encounters much more interesting and fun for your players. Now it's time for the DM bonus tip. If you follow my advice that I've just been talking about using different creature types, then what you're invariably going to find is that they are on different pages in the monster manual. And that flipping back and forth between different pages of the monster manual during a fight is a real pain in the butt. So, what I recommend, there are a few things I'm going to recommend to you. The first one is that obviously you can use little sticky note thingies here, little post-it notes to mark the pages that the monsters are on. That's the very first thing that you can do. Now, failing that still involves flipping back and forth, although the post-it note obviously makes it easier to find. The other thing that you can do is you can use these little handy-dandy monster cards. Now, these monster cards right here, I created myself. I just find images and then I cut and paste the, stat blocks from the monster manual and stuff like that, obviously from PDFs which exist. and make those myself. Now, you could go through a lot of effort to make them yourself. There are also little monster cards that are available on Amazon. There's a link down in the description to some monster cards on Amazon. Now, just be forewarned that they don't include all of the monsters. So if you get it and you're like, hey, what the heck, it's missing this, that, or the other, just be forewarned. It doesn't include all of them, but it has a lot of them. Or you can just make your own. The whole thing here is that having these sorts of monster cards allows you to just simply lay them all out in front of you during the battle, obviously with the backside up, and then you refer to their stat blocks as you play without having to flip back and forth in the pages. Now, failing this, what you could do as well, if you have a PDF of the monster manual or Morning Kingdoms to Foes or whatever, is simply print off the page with the monster on it, and then at least at that time you would have the pages in front of you can refer to without having to flip back and forth. If you want to learn more about building encounters, check out my encounter building playlist. It is going to be in this little video thingy that's going to pop up over here. If you're interested in joining a community of dungeon masters who help each other out, check out my Discord server. There's a link down in the description. Smash that thumbs up button if you found this video helpful. Click here to subscribe, and over here you can watch some more fine videos. And until next time,
Let's play D&D!